Assalamu alaikum students. Hope you all are doing great. Today our topic is a poem The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. In our last lecture we discussed in detail about modern poetry and about T.S. Eliot, and we also discussed few things about The Wasteland. So today we will discuss this poem in detail as it is one of the most important poem of T.S. Eliot, and of course it is also a very much important poem in modern era. If I'll tell you a few things about this poem is that the central message in this poem is the search for meaning in the fragmented post-war modern world, because the purpose of the wasteland is the civilization and the emptiness and the meaningless and aimless life of the people of the human being right after World War One. The situation that is described in this poem is right after the time period of World War One. And the themes, some of the major themes in the poem are death, religion, spirituality. The speaker in the poem is unknown. The emotions that are evoked in this whole poem are anxiety, hope, hopelessness, aimlessness, and this is the poetic form that the poet used in his dramatic monologue. And of course the time period is 20th century. T.S. Eliot originally, as we all discussed in the last week, is originally from America but turned British citizen and is remembered today as a literary critic, a poet, and also an editor. His poems have had a lasting influence on a generation of writers. The Wasteland, the poem epitomizing literary modernism, is one of the most important poems of 20th century, portraying its despondent mood. The Wasteland, with its overarching complexity, fragmented structure, and vast religions, is a masterpiece of literary modernism, depicting the mood of its time, including the desolation and hopelessness of the modern human condition. Now, if we talk about some of few points mentioned in the Wasteland are the Wasteland can be viewed as a poem about brokenness, loss, and Eliot's numerous allusions to the First World War suggest that the war played a significant part in bringing about this social, psychological, and emotional collapse. As you can see in this image, this is two pictures are shown. On one side there is T.S. Eliot and the other side is a society that is post-war, means right after World War One. People are going like in a herd, and everybody is uh, having the same kind of style of clothes, and everybody is moving on a same way, and it shows that the aimlessness of the modern era, of the modern men of the modern age, and how they are showing hopelessness in their life, no aim in life. This is the World War, post World War One era. Eliot completed the poem while recovering from a nervous breakdown because I'll tell you a little bit of graphical biographical context. He met Ezra Pound, and Ezra Pound was the one who introduced him to several modernist poets. And he also had a nervous breakdown, maybe in Switzerland, because at that time, and some of people used to say that after his nervous breakdown, he wrote this poem. Of course, because of World War One, and Switzerland is one of the land, the neutral land at the World War One. It was the only land where there was no war. Otherwise, the whole Europe was on war at that time. Many of the characters who turn up on Eliot's poems, such as Lil, the mother of five whose unhappy marriage is discussed by her friend in a London pub, lead unfulfilling lives, and their relationships are lacking in intimacy and deeper meaning. If I give you a little overview of this poem, a summary, I will say T.L.S. Eliot landmark modernist poem The Wasteland was published in 1922, divided into five sections. The poem explores life in London in the aftermath of the First World War, although its various landscapes include the desert and the ocean as well as the bustling metropolis. The poem is notable for its unusual style, which fuses different poetic forms and traditions. Eliot also alludes to numerous works of literature including the Bible, Shakespeare, Saint Augustine, Hindu and Buddhist sacred texts, as well as some parts of French poetry and Arthurian legends surrounding the Holy Grail. But the poem is also strikingly modern in its reference to jazz music, gramophone, motor cars, typist, and tin food. That you will get the reference. People's lives in general are lacking spiritual significance. The typist in the fire sermon is a good example of his her job involves merely copying or repeating what others have said. When she gets home from work, her food is processed and comes in tins, and her intimate, physical, personal life is mechanical and repetitive, something Eliot neatly captures with his use of regular quatrains at this point in this poem. As you can see, the archetypes of transformation by Jung and archetypes of transformation, how the transformation archetype images occur in this poem, and interaction of symbols expressing the disintegration and death of old patron, and the center of personality shift, and the Holy Grail, the legend of the Holy Grail that we have discussed. Especially Eliot reinforces such an idea by sorry people lives in general are lacking spiritual significance of that time. The typist in the fire sermon is a good example of this. Her job involves merely copying or repeating what others have said. And when she gets home from work, her food is processed and comes in tins, and even her sex life is mechanical and repetitive, something Eliot neatly captures with his use of regular quatrains at this point in the poem. The music she listens to when her lover has gone is played on a gramophone. And I told you before that gramophone is also used in this poem. The imagery of it, of that modern era, it is a world away from the magical music Ferdinand heard on the inactive island in the Shakespeare Tempest. There is a reference of Shakespeare drama The Tempest in this poem. There are multiple references, as I have discussed in start, that how the poet uses in different references like Shakespeare or the Sanskrit, the French poetry, the gramophone, the jazz age, and modern life has lost all sense of magic and meaning in it, according to the poet T.S. Eliot. Eliot reinforces such an idea by overlaying his poem with a loose mythic structure drawn from Arthurian legend and a work of comparative religious study, The Golden Bough. And we will discuss the golden bough. The cure of this spiritual sickness which plagues the king and his land is the Holy Grail, but only those are pure of heart and will find the Grail. Then the legend, the curse. The poem's references to Buddhist five sermons suggest that before we will become worthy of salvation, we must learn to curb our worldly desires and passions in order to attain spiritual enlightenment. The legend and other version that we have discussed. Then the golden bow. The Golden Bow by James Frazer. Specifically, Eliot uses the story of the Fisher King as a form of allegory for the modern world. The Fisher King has been wounded in the groin, and his wound has also affected the kingdom over which he rules. The once fertile and abundant soil has ceased to yield crops. The land has become a wasteland. We must learn to curb our worldly desires and passions in order to attain spiritual enlightenment, according to the poet. And it claimed that this legend was central to almost all the worlds of mythologies. He took many references of Greek mythologies and some of Roman mythologies. The Golden Boy is a reference to mystical tree and Roman myth, as I have said before. The wasteland begins with a reference to a heap of broken images and ends with a collage of quotations taken from various poetic traditions as well as a snippet from the nursery rhyme London Bridge is Falling Down. I told you in the start that this poem is written in fragment, and also maybe we will read another poem of T.S. Eliot, Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. That poem is also written in fragmentation. Now you can see different forms that are used in this poem, and the images used for the in the slide I tried to show you the different images that the poet tries to show in the poem. The wasteland begins with a reference to heap of broken images and ends with a collage of quotations, as you can see in the collage of different images in the slide, taken from various poetic traditions as well as snippet from the nursery rhyme, art, literature, or a little culture. Civilization itself seemed to be under threat. Can we to another thing that shore up the rules. The poem ends upon ambiguous note. Ambiguity means when something is not clear, when the writer shows ambiguity in his sentence, it means it can have multiple meanings of that sentence, and the same ambiguity is used by T.S. Eliot in this poem. That in the start he shows hopelessness, and now he is using the word. He is ending his poem on an ambiguous note with the word repetition of Sanskrit word shanit. Now shanit, which Eliot translate as peace. So there are which can it can be two different meanings, that maybe peace has finally been achieved in the end, or is this merely a wishful thinking, and we are confused to decide that either it is true that he actually received peace in the end, or maybe it's just a wishful thinking of him. The breakdown of the poem into a confused medley of semi-coherent quotations implies that after the war such peace remains a far-off dream. The alchemy, the gold, silver is used for the transmutation of metal, the mythical substance, the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone, maybe you have read in popular fiction, the Harry Potter, the philosopher's stone term is also used in that work. And the goal of alchemy was really a metaphor, and the philosopher's stone is actually used in this time. But what we read in popular fiction, it was written by J.K. Rowling in 1990s. When reading a book on alchemy or the alchemist, the reader must read over the world to figure out the way to follow decoding the secret text to discover the true meaning of life. Then the laboratory is still being used throughout the world as meditative and healing tools. Employees losing one's way and having to start from the beginning all over the world. The rally is the receptivity, the rejoining the world with your renewed vision. The kaleidoscope is a tube of mirrors containing loose colored fragments. In the poem, the film of images that are spliced, edited together to create an emotional reaction from the viewer, and it can be used to document reality, capture the dynamism and chaos of the modern age, because the modern age, especially the era of 19th to 1960s or 70s, 1910 to the time of World War One and World War Two, it was a chaotic time. The modern age was very chaotic, especially at the time of World War One and World War Two. For the Europeans, the Turks, and the Americans, and some of the Asian countries, they all were suffering by the loss of World War One and World War Two. So the breakdown of the poem is into a confused medley of semi-coherent quotations, implies that after the war such peace remains a far-off dream. Like he is trying to say the peace can be only a dream after the world war, because we cannot attain, although it's an irony that in order to get peace we have to go on war, but no peace can get, we cannot have peace in war. And also the poet is that the poem implies that after the war the peace, the wish of remains a far off dream, and it can only be a wishful thinking. And if we discuss few of the themes, the fragmentation and decay are used in the poem, that enacted through the poem's use of free verse, especially when he said what the thunder said, and it reference to fragments and broken images. Then the relationships and intimacy is used in the poem. The conversation at the London pub, a game of chess is shown. Then the wars. See the poem's references to an archduke, suggesting Archduke Franz Ferdinand, whose assassination caused the outbreak of World War One. Maybe you guys know that there was an Austrian prince Ferdinand, Franz Ferdinand, because after the assassination of him, the World War One started. And because of the outbreak of World War One, the rats, dead men and their bones, demoted soldiers, and possible shell shock victims, because the World War One victimized everybody, every human being who were at war or who were at home, everybody, every woman, every children, every man was getting affected by the consequences of the World War One. If we see the meaning, the mythical method for Eliot, the mythical method was the means of revitalizing poetry. According to Eliot, poetry had become in its present state to beholden to description, narrative, discussion, to reflection, to decoration. Then modern music age and jazz age. When you will read American literature, so you will see that jazz age was very much important element of important era American literature, especially from 1920s to 1930s. This spent a time period was very much famous related to jazz music, and it's also called roaring jazz age, because in this era few things were getting very much popular. The motor cars were getting very much popular, the jazz music, the parties, the big parties, and the society was going very ill at that time. They were losing their morals in modern era, especially in America, and of course, like Britain and Europe influenced America. In the modern age, America started influence uh, Britain and Europeans, as many of the writers, many of the poets came from America to England. They also brought their cultures with them, and from that music and jazz it became very much popular. But in the 1930s it somehow ended, loses its essence. So that was all about this poem. Hope you guys have get it. Allah Hafiz, students.